Welcome to the first episode of the Ask Elliott Show. I am so excited to be doing a show like this, to be putting out video content like this. You know, in the past few years, most of you who don't know me, I've been traveling around the world giving lectures and writing books about solution-focused brief therapy, and something has dawned on me, something has really hit me, and it's just how lucky and fortunate I have been along this journey, because I went to a school where there was a well-known, reputable, knowledgeable solution-focused practitioner right there on the faculty. So any question I had, I could go to her at any time. I could ask her about what I was reading, the research I was going through. I could ask her about clients I was working with. All of this stuff, I could ask her at any moment. And, you know, we even joke about her name is Linda Metcalf, Dr. Linda Metcalf. And we joke to this day about the fact that I beat a path. There's like a worn path from the classroom to where her office used to be, because I was constantly asking her questions about solution-focused brief therapy. And that grew, that expanded. So I eventually started attending conferences, attending trainings, by happenstance becoming really close friends to a couple people in the solution-focused community. So I've always had access to people who had the knowledge to answer my questions and really help me grow and enjoy doing solution-focused work. And that was really, really important, because solution-focused brief therapy is so different than problem-focused approaches to psychotherapy. And if you want to get good at it, you're going to have resources available to you. And here I am, I start traveling, and I travel all around the United States, all throughout the world, giving lectures, and I noticed that not everybody had access to those types of people. Not everybody had access to the resources that could help them grow and learn how to do solution-focused brief therapy with a significant level of confidence and competence in their lives. So I would go to these places, and I would do a 1-day training, a 2-day training, a 3-day training, a 5-day training. And I know that no matter how much training you get, no matter how intense the training is, you're going to have accesses to resources to keep that learning going after the initial training, to keep your sword sharp, if you will. And for those of you, and many people in our field, they don't have easy access to solution-focused people. But here we are in 2016, we have access to anything we want, anytime we want, as long as somebody's put in the time to make it available to you. So that's what the Ask Elliott show is going to be all about. All you have to do is tweet me, send me a message on Facebook, even email me, use the hashtag AskElliott, and I will answer all of your questions in my weekly show and put it out there so that you guys can really learn, understand, and use solution-focused brief therapy with a significant level of confidence and a significant level of competence in your work. Because it's important to be able to ask these questions, and nothing is off limits. You can ask me anything. I have been doing this for a long time. I have been writing about this for a long time. I've been researching this for a long time, and I'm happy to share whatever information I have with you, and let's go. You know, I've been thinking about doing something like this for a long time, and really didn't have the resources to do it. And then I met my man Kenneth, who has the skill to be able to put this in the type of package that I thought was quality, because I want you guys to like it. And, you know, here we go. In the past year or so, the number of questions that I have been getting from people all around the world about this approach has exploded. I mean, just last night, I had to sit down on a Friday night, mind you. I had to sit down and clean out my inbox of 700 emails. And the large majority of those emails, and all of them came in within the last probably 3 or 4 days, and the large majority of those emails were people asking me questions about using solution-focused brief therapy in their work. So let's talk about it. Let's get into it, and let's grow and become great solution-focused practitioners. So let's start. I'm gonna answer, 2 or 3 questions today from people that sent me messages on social media. The first one comes from Paula Colleen. What's up, Paula? Who says, as I venture into private practice, I'm beginning to develop my intake forms. So in solution-focused brief therapy, there's not a lot of assessment. So how do I use assessment in my intake forms? And you know what? I think someone else asked a similar question. Someone else asked a similar question. Do I create treatment plans in my work? And if so, how do you do it? So let me get into that, because you're 100% right. In solution-focused brief therapy, we don't do a lot of assessment, but I recognize that assessment is a part of the therapy sometimes, or at least a part of the therapy process, because of agency mandates or the insurance that people are using and things like that. So I know it's just part of the process, and you guys have to do it. When I became a solution-focused therapist, I was actually working at an agency right near here, actually, and in that agency, I had to do a huge amount of intake forms that was all about the problem. So sometimes that stuff is unavoidable. So here's what I'm going to say about that. If you have to develop a treatment plan, if you have to do assessment as part of your treatment, that's fine. Just make sure when you're working with the client that it's very clear on which part is assessment and which part is therapy. So make sure it's really clear that the therapy and the assessment are divided. If you start to combine them, then the client's going to get confused, and so will you, actually. So if I'm going to sit down with my client, I'm going to say things like, before we start doing the therapy, I have some other questions I need to ask you. So you see how that takes, and it puts a dividing line between the assessment component and the therapy component. And the other thing that was really helpful for me in those early days is I would blame the necessity on the assessment to a third party. So I'd say things like, is it okay before we start doing the therapy, my job requires, the agency requires that I do this paperwork with you. Is it okay if we do that? So now they're able to see me as the clinician, but they'll see the agency as the administrator in charge of this intake process. And so that's the most helpful way I can do it. So people often ask me, like, do I think assessment and treatment planning and things like that can be a part of solution-focused brief therapy? Of course I do. And it can be an important part of any treatment, but as long as you make sure and you make it very clear to the client that the assessment and the treatment are separated. I think the biggest problem people have, or the biggest mistake people make, is they accidentally combine therapy and assessment, and it just gets the whole process muddled. Solution-focused brief therapy really isn't, the therapy part really isn't about all that assessment. See, I'm now at a point in my career where I work in my own private practice. I don't take insurance, so I don't have to do any of those things if I don't want to. When a client comes in my office, we immediately get down to work. We immediately get down to business. But I recognize that not everybody's in that situation, and sometimes you work in a school setting, or sometimes you work in a agency setting, or sometimes you work for an insurance company that mandates that. So yes, I think you should do it. You should focus on it. You should do it to the best of your ability. Just make sure when you're working with your client, it's very, very clear that we've separated assessment and treatment. I think it's important that we understand solution-focused brief therapy is an exercise. It's an exercise in language that the client goes through from talking with us. So just like when I go see my personal trainer and exercise, he might ask me to do the same sit-ups, but it's having a different impact because it's taking my body to a different place. So going through the same language process is still significantly important to the client. And the second thing is to recognize that the questions are not the same because the client is not the same each time you meet them. So then I have a third important thought to get to in a second. So what I mean by that part, the questions are not the same because the client is not the same. One of our colleagues, a guy by the name of Mark McCurgo, who is maybe I won't say that. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. I can't say he's the single smartest person I've ever met, or somebody's going to get mad at me. But he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. He does solution-focused brief therapy in consultation, in the business world. He runs organizations. If you Google him, you'll find his amazing work. The dude used to be a rocket scientist. Like, he is that dude. Like, he is that smart. And he likes to describe this as solution-focused brief therapy puts the client through a process of what we call brain stretching. And each time I come and see them, as a consequence of them answering the questions in the first session, their brain gets stretched a little bit. So when they come back to the next session and I say things like, so what's been better? I'm not asking the person I met with before, I'm asking the person after they've had this brain stretched and their experience enhanced and their life taking place a little bit. So it's a little bit of a different question. And if I say something like, and what skills did you use to help this week go a little bit better? they're going to start talking about this week as opposed to the previous week, which is what they talked about in the last session. So even though I might ask the same question, the question landed on different ears, and that makes it different. And the third thing is if the questions develop organically as a process of the conversation, then the client is not going to experience it as the same question. They're going to experience it as the natural development of this particular conversation. So that's why I've always said it is so important. If you're going to learn solution-focused brief therapy, it's important to ask these types of questions. It's important to have access to people who can answer these types of questions. And it's important to be able to see video so you can see the way the conversation unfolds. I don't want you thinking of solution-focused brief therapy as an intervention or a technique. We really have to start recognizing this approach as a process of conversation that unfolds each time you talk to a client. The last question I'm going to answer in this first episode comes from Christopher, I think you pronounce it Chung, and he says, when a client prefers to stay in problem-focused dialogue, should I respect them and simply ask them whether or not it is helpful to stay in that space, or begin to maneuver the conversation towards more solution talk? Man, that is a great question. And it's one of the questions that I get a lot when I'm on the road. Like, what do you do when clients want to stay in a very problem-saturated part of the conversation? What do you do with clients who want to stay very stuck in the problem? And the answer is very simple. So he's saying, like, do we maneuver the conversation towards more problem, towards more like solution dialogue? Do we respect the client and stay in the problem and ask them if we find it helpful? My answer actually is neither. I think what's important to recognize about solution-focused brief therapy is I have no say-so, and nor should I. I have no say-so whatsoever in what the client is going to talk about and what they want to talk about. They get to come prepared and armed to talk about anything they want to talk about, and that should have no influence by me. So I don't want to respect them and allow them to stay in the problem-saturated world, or I don't want to stay in the problem-saturated world. Of course I want to respect them, but I don't want to stay in the problem-saturated world, because then I wouldn't be doing my job as a therapist, let alone a solution-focused therapist. But I also don't want to maneuver them away from what they want to talk about, because that would be me having too much influence over what they want to be doing. What I think is really important is that we are very deliberate and we're very specific about what we're amplifying in the client's story. So if a client comes in my office and they say, man, I'm really frustrated, I'm really depressed, I'm really sad, I've got this big old problem, this problem's been plaguing me my whole life, and they go into a 15-minute description of how this problem's been plaguing them their whole life. What's important for me as a clinician is I get to decide what I'm going to amplify in that client story. So at the end of the client telling me their problem story, if I say, oh, tell me more about that, I'm actually amplifying their problem. Or if I say, gosh, that sounds terrible, I'm amplifying their problem. And very often as therapists, we accidentally amplify the problem part of their story because we think we're being empathetic. So if the client comes in and they say, oh my gosh, problem, I've had this problem my whole life and everything's so horrible and everything's so bad. And I say, gosh, that sounds terrible, because I think I need to be empathetic in that situation. I just accidentally amplified the problem and allowed the client to stay in that area with more depth and for longer. But instead, if I'm really aware of what I amplify, and a client comes in my office and they tell me problem, and they say, I've been struggling with this my whole life, and everything's been so horrible, and everything's been so drab, and everything's been so difficult, and I say, gosh, and can you explain to me for a second how you maintain the level of strength, hope, and courage to come into therapy today? Do you see how I expressed empathy, but I invited them to think about their hope, strength, and resilience and courage that brought them into therapy. And that, whatever we amplify in the session, is going to grow. And as a solution-focused therapist, it's my job to amplify the things that lead more towards change. So the question I always get is, how do you handle clients who want to stay stuck in the problem? Or how do you want to handle clients that want to stay stuck in their problem story? Well, I'm going to honor that that's what they want to talk about, but I'm going to be very aware and very deliberate about the amplification choices that I'm making in the session. So as the session unfolds, I'm going to be knowledgeable about whatever I ask about is going to grow. So if I ask more about this person's problem, even if I'm doing so because I want to give them empathy, or if I ask more about this person's problem just because I'm curious, or if I ask more about this person's problem for whatever reason, I'm amplifying that and subsequently growing it. But if I ask about their strength and their hope, their capacity to change, their inherent resources, their past successes, that's the information that's going to grow. And then the client's going to come along on that level of conversation because that's where the change is. And that's what brought them into therapy in the first place. So I hope that answers that question because I get that one a lot, actually. So there you have it. The first episode of the Ask Elliott Show. And I am so excited about this. I'm so pumped. You know, if you follow me on social media, I always in my tweets and Facebook posts and things, a lot of times with hashtag SFBT everywhere, because I really want to get this approach everywhere, and I really want people in our field to understand what solution-focused brief therapy is and be able to use it. Like, I don't write about this stuff just to be writing about it, and I don't travel around the world lecturing about this stuff just to be lecturing. To be perfectly honest with you, it's hard to do what I do. It's very, very difficult to be sleeping in hotels by myself, jet lag, 3 cities in 1 week. You know, tomorrow after I get done shooting this, I'm gonna be in 2 cities in 5 days, and it's hard. I do this stuff because I want you people to be able to use it. It has completely changed my life to be able to do this stuff with clients, and to watch clients do the stuff that they do is amazing, and I know it can change your life too. So, any questions you have, tweet me, get a hold of me via email, social media, leave comments in the section down below. Just end with the hashtag Ask Elliott, and I'll be using that to make further videos. We're going to be releasing a video, depending on how quickly my man Kenneth can work, but we'll be releasing a video once every week, once every 2 weeks at the longest, because I'm going to keep this stuff coming at you. And even if you don't send me questions, I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions that I've received from the past few weeks. So I'm going to make sure, if you're following this YouTube channel, if you're following me on social media, you're going to get pragmatic information you can use in your practice, because I want everybody to have access to how to use solution-focused brief therapy. So go ahead and participate in the comment section. I'll respond to every single comment. Ask your questions, tweet me, post on Instagram, wherever you can do it. You can use the hashtag Ask Elliott, and we'll address that going forward. So thank you, and I'll see you in episode 2.